Dude, you better make me look good. Dude, just relax, you look fine, these are gonna come out great. You sure? You sure you don't look fat? I like to eat pizza and drink beer. Hey everyone, Mike Burke here with InsideRealEstatePhotography.com, and in this video I'm going to take you through the process of doing headshots for your clients, from the gear you'll need, camera settings, how to place and pose your clients, and how to shoot, edit, and deliver your images. So I'm on site at Motion City Media Studio in Asbury Park, New Jersey. They're an awesome company that I do some work for, and they're cool enough to let me come in here and use the studio when I need to do a headshot or something like that. So shout out to my man Frank, who owns Motion City Media. Thank you for letting me shoot here today. So if you're a real estate photographer, then inevitably at some point, one of your clients is going to ask you to do a headshot. So if you're not familiar with this process yet, I suggest brushing up on it now, so when the time comes, you'll be ready to go. Headshots are one of the auxiliary services that we as real estate photographers can offer our clients to make some extra money from time to time, but most importantly, to be a full-service, one-stop shop for all our clients' needs. Now, I don't claim to be an expert portrait or studio photographer by any means, but the good news is you don't have to be. I know this can be intimidating if you haven't done it before, as it was for me before I did it my first time, but I'm going to show you my simple and straightforward setup for doing headshots that will get you great results. Now let's talk about the gear I'm using and also my basic setup for doing headshot photography. Now if you're doing flash or flambient real estate photography, then the good news is you probably have a lot of the gear you'll need to do this already. If not, if you can't afford to buy flashes right now or don't really want to, you could always do headshots outside and get great results as well. A lot of times when I do this indoor studio style headshot photography, I will take the client outside at the end of the session to do a couple of headshots out on the street for some variety. Now I always try to provide some variety, so here we have a white backdrop. Now obviously a lot of you won't have access to a studio like this, and that's totally fine. I've done them on location at offices or wherever, and you could always find a white wall or a solid color wall or whatever to use as a backdrop. You don't need to do this in a studio. I also can show you some examples of that right now that I've done at an office. All right, so now let's talk about the gear I'm using, and I will link to all this gear down in the description below if you're interested in buying any of this gear that I'm mentioning. So first, I have my camera on my tripod here. It's the Sony a7 III. I know a lot of you may know from watching my channel, I use the a7S III to do my real estate photography, which is what I'm filming this with right now. But I do have this body, it's 24 megapixels, so it's higher, resolution. So I do prefer that for portraits since I have it. I certainly could get away with the a7S III if I needed to, but I do have this, so that's what I'm using. So I have my Godox X Pro S trigger on here to trigger my Godox flashes. And my tripod is just the same tripod I use for real estate photography. I know it's not really meant to be in this sort of orientation with the head I'm using at least. I sort of have to rig it that way, but a lot of times when I do the headshots, most of the time actually, I just hand holding the camera to do them. But for this instance, since I was recording through the monitor, I do have it set on a tripod, but typically I would actually just have it in my hands. So you don't need to have a tripod for this, but it's nice to have too, and it keeps things steady, and you can talk to your client to have them move without worrying about your camera in your hands all the time. So it's actually not a bad idea to use a tripod to do this. All right, so now let's talk about lenses. Unfortunately, the wide angle lenses that we're using on a daily basis to do real estate photography with are not going to be good portrait lenses, as they're very unflattering for taking pictures of people with. So a portrait lens may be something you need to invest in to do this kind of work. I highly recommend getting something 85 millimeters or beyond. There are a lot of budget 85 millimeter lenses out there. You can get some for like 300 bucks. So you do a couple headshots and it pays for that lens, and in the future you can make money with it. I'm using the 70-200 G Master lens. It is a very expensive lens, so if you don't have a use for this kind of lens, that is a big investment. But if you are in the market for something like this, it is a fantastic lens and I highly recommend it. I have it set at 100 millimeters, so that's what I'm going to be shooting at today. All right, so now let's talk about the lights I'm using and my setup I have going on back here. As my main light, I have my Godox AD200 Pro inside of this Godox softbox. Now a softbox is obviously something we don't use for real estate photography, so this is one of those things that's an additional investment along with the light stands, but they're not that expensive. This Godox softbox was like 30 bucks, I think. I forget exactly what size it is, but again, I'll link to these down in the description. The AD200 Pro is obviously something I do use all the time for real estate photography. Also this reflector, I do use this for real estate photography too, so not an additional investment, and these aren't expensive either. So I'm using this as my main light on my subject, and this is a bounce fill, so I'm just bouncing light off of this to fill some shadows in on the other side of their face. Now back here, I have another Godox softbox. It's a strip box. It has the honeycomb in it to help reduce spill and direct the light right at the back of my subject. So I can create a rim light or a light around the edge of their body to help separate them from the background. Inside this, I have my Godox V862 speed light. So that's what I'm using in there. That's also something I use for real estate photography. So that's my lights and my boxes that I'm using to do these portraits. All right, now let's talk about subject placement and posing. I think this is the most intimidating part for most people, as it was for me, worrying about not knowing what to tell people, how to pose, how to make them look good, but just use your common sense and you'll do just fine. If something doesn't look right, then change it and you'll get great results. So as far as subject placement goes, I'm placing them between this main light and the reflector here, so I get this bounce here. And some things to keep in mind about posing. Again, you're not reinventing the wheel here. You don't need to make people do back handsprings or anything crazy, bend this way, bend that way. Don't overthink it, just keep it simple and you'll do just fine. Some things to keep in mind though is, most likely you don't want someone standing full on to the camera, shoulder square. It's unflattering for most people. Always have them on a bit of an angle. Ask them to stand up straight, elongate their body. Always pretend, I tell them to pretend that they have a string pulling up the back of their shirt to help them elongate themselves and makes them look slimmer. Everyone wants to look slim, everyone's afraid to looking fat and all that. If there's a heavy set person with a big belly, then you might want to turn them towards the camera more so their belly's not sticking out so much. You know, just again, use your common sense. You know, it's always good to tell people what to do with their hands sometimes, you know, have their hands folded. Sometimes guys like have them in their pockets, you know, grab the edge of their jacket, things like that. Crossing your arms, the power pose I call it. Some people think it's funny too, so when you tell them to do that, do the power pose. You know, you want to make your subjects at ease. That's another important part of this. Make them feel comfortable. If you're nervous, they're going to be nervous. So you want to avoid them being nervous. Obviously, you want them to feel comfortable so they have the best expression, and make them laugh if you can. I know we're not all that funny. I have trouble with it too. So those are all things to keep in mind when posing your subjects. All right guys, now let's talk about camera settings real quick. Nothing overly complicated here. I'm shooting in manual mode. My shutter speed's at 1/200th of a second. You want to stay in that vicinity or higher in order to get sharp images. You don't want a low shutter speed, so watch out for that. My focal length on my lens, I'm shooting at 100 millimeters. Again, I highly recommend getting a lens that's 85 millimeters at least for portraits. My aperture is set at f8. I want everything in focus. I'm not worried about like blurring out the background here because it's just a solid background. If I was shooting portraits outside, that's another story. I might want to blow out the background if we're out on the street and there's people and cars and things like that. You know, that's a whole nother story. But in the studio here, or when you have a backdrop, you know, it's always a good idea, I would say, to keep it above 5.6. Make sure, you know, everything's in focus. If you're shooting at f2.8 or f1 point something, like on a really fast lens, you know, you may have the eyes in focus and everything else is blurry. So, you know, you don't want to shoot that shallow for this sort of thing. All right, so just a couple more things here. My white balance is set to manual 5500 degrees Kelvin, which should coincide with the color temperature of my flashes. So we should have a nice consistent look throughout all our images. If you use auto white balance, you will have slight color shifts between your shots, which you can fix in editing, obviously, but that's annoying and more work for you. And if you can avoid that, why not avoid it? My ISO is set at 100 right now. I do play around with that though periodically. My main light set at 1/64th power, and the rear rim light set to 1/8 power. That's a speed light, and that's the 8200. This is a much more powerful light, obviously. So again, you know, those settings will vary depending on your scenario, your environment. Usually what I do is I isolate each flash. By the way, each one is on its own group, so that's on group A, that's on group B, and they're both on manual mode, so I can control them independently from here. I can switch the power of each one from this trigger. I usually start with the rear one. I'll just turn that on and fire it off and get my placement right so I can see how it's cutting me out from the background and see how I like that placement. Once I get that situated, then I'll turn on the main light and start adjusting that power and adjusting its position until I get a look that I like. You should show up to your shoot at least a half an hour early, maybe even an hour early, especially if you're not used to doing this, to get your stuff situated, because you don't want your talent coming in, or your client coming in, I should say, and you messing around with all this stuff while they're there and they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs. I use myself sometimes with my remote, or if you have someone else around that you can have stand in so you can test your settings out and get your stuff situated before your client gets there, that would be ideal. All right, so now let me take you through the shooting session I did earlier with my client. He was nice enough to consent to let me film it. So now you can see everything we just talked about in action. All right guys, so I'm gonna take you through the shoot here. I'm not gonna show you every shot I took, obviously, because that would just be boring. So I just edited this down, and so you can see and get a good idea of how I go through the motions here. You know, first things first here, I'm just getting him into position, giving him direction. It's always good to give the clients direction. They're always looking for direction. You know, they never do these photo shoots and they have no idea what's going on. So they're looking to you to tell them what to do. So this was a test shot. Obviously, the right side of his face from our view is way too dark. I did test shots on myself before he got there, but I'm a lot taller than he is, and you know, things may not be perfect after you do test shots before they get there. So, you know, you have to make some tweaks. So, but at least everything's in pretty much where it needs to be, and then you can tweak it once they get there. That's another test shot. Still slightly dark on the right side of his face, but not bad. I did a bunch of shots with him facing that direction, away from the main light source. It gives it a little more of a dramatic, like, three-dimensional look. But like this one, yeah, it's still a little dark on the right. I did tweak that more. I don't have it in this video, but now I'm turning him towards the light. And these are more so the ones that the agents go for, but it's good to give them options. And sometimes they, you know, I have them choose 3 photos at the end, so they have options to pick from, and you give them different looks. I try to supply different looks, different backdrops. I'll give them 3 different backgrounds in this studio when I'm shooting at the studio here. But shooting from this angle, you know, his whole face is lit nicely, so they tend to go for that look. But here you can see, I asked him to stand up straight, and you can see the difference between those 2 photos where he's slunching there and now he's standing up straight, how much of a difference that makes, you know. And here I'm showing him the photos. I always highly suggest showing the client the photos as you're shooting them, making sure that, you know, they're on board with what you're doing, they're happy with what you're doing. The last thing you want to do is not show them anything and then not be happy with what you're doing and then having to reshoot it or what have you. You know, you don't want that to happen. So here I'm putting the black backdrop down. So I'll do the white, I'll do a black, and then behind us is like a brick wall. I'll do some on that wall. But if you're in an office, if you just have a white wall, that's totally fine. As I mentioned earlier, you know, I have him standing away from the white wall so that it looked gray in those last pictures. So that's the look I was going for. If you want more of a white look, have him closer. You could even light the white wall. But again, here I'm just having him stand away from the light, towards the light. I did a bunch of different variations of both of those, but I'm just showing the 2. But I did a whole bunch of, you know, I'm doing like 15 to 20 photos in each position. And, you know, again, showing him what I did. That way, you know, if he doesn't see any that he liked in there, we can just pop him back in for a few more shots. He can give me some feedback. Oh, I don't like it when I do this or that. And then we could tweak that and we can get the look he's going for or gonna be happy with. So here's the brick wall. I got everything to position here, and I'm using a 3rd speed light here. That's what I just grabbed. I'm putting it on the floor and pointing it towards the brick wall to light that up because we want to see that. That's a cool backdrop. So I'm lighting that up with a 3rd flash, an additional flash. That's a V862 as well, like the one I have in my rear light there. So you can see there, it's lighting up the brick in the back. So that's cool. You can see and get that texture in there, which is a nice, cool backdrop. This is one of my favorite backdrops to use in this studio, actually. I always like these ones. So again, you know, both positions away towards the light, turning his shoulders different ways, and you know, just doing slight tweaks to each of those positions. Not doing anything crazy, just kind of having him stand there with his hands folded, keeping things simple. So just a couple things I want to talk about before we get into the editing portion of this video. I forgot to mention before in the camera settings part that I am shooting JPEG and RAW, and the reason I'm doing that is the RAW I'm going to use to edit with, obviously, and the JPEGs I can use to send off to the client as proofs. What I include in the price of my headshot is 3 finished edited photos, so I'll take all these JPEGs, I'll open them up in preview here, and I'll go through and I'll delete any bad ones where the flash misfired or he has got a weird expression on his face, anything you don't want to send to the client that doesn't look good. That way we can weed all those out, and then once they're weeded out, we can send them off to them and let them choose their 3 favorites. And I do that by using PixieSet. So PixieSet is what I use to send my real estate photos as well, and I have a video on that. I'll put that up on the screen right now. But this is a great functionality, especially with these portrait things, and I'll show you how that's done. But so I'll just create a gallery here called Headshot Proofs, and I'll put a watermark on it. You don't want them stealing your images, although my watermark really isn't the best here. Don't use mine as an example. Have something that, you know, overlays on it so they can't just screenshot your photos and use them without your permission and not pay you, blah, blah, blah. But this is great. PixieSet, you can have them pay before they download and all this stuff, so it's just a great tool. But anyway, I'll upload all these photos into a gallery, as you see that I'm doing right now. All right, so once the photos are uploaded into the gallery, we can now go in the settings here and set this up so the client can favorite their favorite photos. So we just go to the settings here. First we have the download. We don't want them to be able to download, so we're gonna go into there and turn this section off. Next section is the favorites, which is obviously what we're after here. So we leave that on. The store, obviously, we want to turn that off too. We're not selling these right now. These are just proofs. So one other thing I just want to tweak real quick is the thumbnail placement. Obviously, it's cutting through the middle of his face and we don't want that. So I just want to change the focal point here, put it right over his face. So when the agent gets the email, you know, it'll look right and not be cutting his head off. And now we can preview the gallery and see what it looks like. When he gets it, this is what it'll look like. You click to open. I just love PixieSet's design. It's just clean, modern, and tasteful. It looks fantastic. My clients comment on it all the time. They really like the look of it. I just love the look of it. So this is what the gallery will look like when he receives it. So he can look through all these photos now and pick out the 3 that he likes the best. You'll notice on the bottom right-hand corner of each photo, there's a little heart icon, and that's obviously the favorite icon. So he can click on the heart for the 3 that he likes best. And once he's finished doing that, he can let me know, and then I can go in and see which ones he favorited, and those will be the 3 photos that I edit. All right, so once this is all together here, the gallery is all together, I can just click on send and get the link. And I can either send directly through PixieSet, or I can just copy the link and put it in an email, whatever you want to do. I'm just gonna copy the link here and put it in an email telling him, pick your 3 favorites, you know, the instructions, let me know when you're finished, and I'll go in and edit those and I'll send them off when they're finished. All right guys, so the client has chosen his 3 favorites and I have them here in Lightroom. These are already been edited, so I'm not gonna take you through all of these, but I'm just gonna do one of these. This is with a white background here, and I figure let's do this one because most likely, if you're shooting these in an office, you'll probably have a white wall or whatever. So obviously, like I mentioned, I had the camera and subject, quite far away from the white wall because I wanted to get a gray look, not a white. I'm not a big fan of the stark white background. So obviously we got a pretty dark gray look here. This is maybe even a slightly darker than I wanted to go, but it still looks cool. All right, so I'm just gonna start here in the basic module here. Obviously this whole thing's a little bit on the dark side, so I'm gonna add some exposure in here, brighten this whole thing up here a little bit, somewhere around there. Bring up the shadows here a bit, bring down the highlights a little bit on his face here. Just globally bring down the highlights a little bit. All right, that's where we're at right now. It's looking better. I'm gonna add some clarity into this, not a ton. Here's some more little tweaks here we can do. I'm gonna take the brush tool here. If you hit the O key, it will highlight what you're brushing in red. I'm just gonna brush his teeth here. Yes, I'm brushing his teeth. I'm gonna hit the O key again so that goes away. I'm just gonna make them a little bit whiter. You know, don't get too over the top with this stuff. I'm just gonna raise the exposure up a little bit. Already looks better. Bring down the saturation. Before and now after. So his teeth are looking better. Another thing we can do here is to click new, get a new brush, and zoom into his eyes here a little bit. Paint in his irises here. And on this side. Just see if we can bring out a little bit more of the color of his eyes. And you know, the eyes are really important for portraits, so if you want to pay attention to those. Again, I'm just going to bring the exposure up a little bit. There you can already see it's brought out the color of his eyes a little bit more, and also a little saturation. Before, after. So, you know, again, nothing dramatic here, but just bringing out his eyes a little bit more. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna control click on the image. I'm gonna create a virtual copy, and I'm gonna apply sharpening to this copy. I don't wanna sharpen the whole image, so I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna keep one without sharpening and one with sharpening, and then we're gonna take these over to Photoshop and do some editing over there. So I just wanna go to the detail setting here. And yeah, so you can take this target and go right to his eye, because that's really what I use to gauge the sharpening, because I really want his eyes to cut through. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just sharpen until I see that the eyes are really nice and sharp and prominent. Somewhere around here, around 90, looks good. See, his eyes are really sharp now, looking good. And if I toggle this on and off, you can see before, no sharpening, and now with sharpening. It's a significant difference, as you can see. Select both of these. I'm going to control click again and go to edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. All right, so now as you see, we have both layers open here as in Photoshop as layers. I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see what's going on. So on top, we have the unsharpened layer. And then if you turn this off, you can see the sharpened layers underneath. So I'm going to bring the sharpened layer up above, and I'm going to bring a layer mask on it by clicking this button here. So now we have a white layer mask, and I want to make sure I have black as my foreground color. And I hit B for my brush tool. I want to make sure I have a soft brush. It's around 6%. That's fine. That's very soft. My flow, you can have the flow 100%. And I'm just going to go over his skin now with this black brush. And I don't know if you can really tell by watching this on the internet, but it's softening his skin. I don't want his skin sharpened, because that's just gonna make his skin imperfections stand out even more. So I'm just gonna go over his face everywhere, pretty much, and soften it. And you know, so the unsharpened layer will come through, and we won't have his skin sharpened. Facial hair, you know, is fine. If this was a woman, I would be going over the whole face here, but you know, hair and facial hair, you know, that's okay to be sharp. That looks good, sharpened. I don't want the background to be sharpened either, because if you look, you know, zoom in, you know, it's really just making the noise of the camera noise even more prominent. So we don't want that to be sharpened. So I'm just gonna, you know, with this mask selected still, I'm gonna take the quick selection tool, and I'm just gonna go over the background here. All right, so now we have the background selected here. And one thing I want to do before I do anything else is I want to save this selection, because I want to use it for something else in a minute. So I'm going to go to save selection. I'm just type BG for background, and I'm going to hit OK. Now we can get rid of this background, this sharpened area in this sharpened photo. So I'm just going to make sure I have the mask selected. I want to make sure black is now my background color, not my foreground color. So I'm going to hit X to toggle that to the background. So with my mask selected again, I'm just going to hit Command X to cut. And now you can see on the mask here, it's cut out that background area. So now it's no longer sharpened, and it's a lot less noisy looking now. Now what I want to do here is I'm going to merge these down into one layer, because I want to make a few more edits now to this in Photoshop before we go back to Lightroom. So one thing I want to do is now I want to load that selection back up. So I'm going to go to load selection, go to the background BG that we made. So it'll load that up now again. There's a little greenish, yellowish tint to this. I want it to be straight gray, so I just want to, you know, address that. And that's probably because of the fluorescent lights overhead. that kind of bled into our photo. You know, the flashes will overpower it, but you know, we might get some effect from it. So I'm just gonna go to hue and saturation here. I'm going to bring the saturation way down on this. So as you see now, we're getting a nice gray look. It's not tinted with yellow and orange, or yellow and green or whatever it was. You know, again, you could affect the lightness too here if you wanted to, bring the brightness of it up a little bit maybe. So here's our changes: before and after, before and after. You can see how greenish yellow it was, so I can now merge that down into our layer here. And one other thing I want to address is his shirt color. It's just not looking very white. It might not have been straight white shirt, but I want to make it more white because it just, you know, again, doesn't have the cleanest look. So I'm going to take my quick selection tool again. Alright, so I have his shirt selected now. It doesn't have to be like surgically perfect. Now I want to just go to select and modify feather. I'm going to feather this by like 5 pixels. Again, I'm going to go to the hue and saturation adjustment here. And I'm going to bring the saturation down on his shirt. See, it's turning whiter now. Let me zoom in so you can see better. Again, you can mess with the lightness here, bring the lightness up on it. Just make his shirt look a little cleaner, whiter. It's looking good, so let's see, before and after. So it's cleaner looking now, it's whiter. So that's looking nice. So this is looking really good now. Just want to check, you know, just look for these little hairs. So again, I'm gonna merge this layer down. Now with this layer selected, I'm just gonna take my clone stamp tool and just kind of take out some of these hairs that are sticking up. His hair is pretty neat. A lot of time women or people with longer hair, there's more stragglies like to deal with than what he's got going on here. That's fine, you know, a little bit. You don't want it to look like he's got a helmet on, so you don't want to like smooth out the line, but you know, just any hairs that are sticking up, take them out, and you know, any stragglers. One last thing I want to do in Photoshop, here you can see kind of a little bit of a light leak from our rim light here that's lighting up, you know, his shoulder and stuff. So I just want to deal with that real fast. I'm just going to do that by taking the spot healing brush thing. Just kind of paint over some of this area, so it doesn't look like the light is kind of leaking in here. Oops. Any like a little vignetting going on over here, you can deal with that too with this. The corners, if you see anything. All right, so I'm just gonna save this image and I'll kick it back over to Lightroom. One last thing I would do in Lightroom before I export these, so I would give him, you know, a full, you know, on version like this, and then also what I would do is create a virtual copy. I'll give him a traditional like headshot crop sort of thing. So I'll just go to the crop tool and crop in on this in a more traditional headshot format. Just keep his face like right in the middle there, like a head and shoulders headshot, you know, traditional headshot. Agents will like to use these for multiple things, so they can use this for, you know, a full version for stuff, and then a headshot crop version for other stuff, and business cards, what have you. So it's nice to provide them with, you know, multiple crops. Select my headshots, and Command-Shift-E will go to the export dialog, and I will deliver these. I will not check any of these boxes. I'll deliver these at full resolution, just export them out. And now I'll show you the 3 finished headshots that I'm delivering to this client. right, so now I'm over in PixieSet again, and this is how I would deliver the final images to the client. I'll just create a gallery called Final Edited Headshots. No watermark. Well, actually, yes, a watermark. Because they still have to pay. If they didn't pay yet, you want to have a watermark on it. So let's go to the folder with the edited headshots in there, and I will just upload those into here. Once they're uploaded, just reorder them in the right order. So you have full crop, full crop, full crop of each of the 3 they chose. And then I would just go to settings again, download. Again, we're gonna have that off. Favorites, we don't need that anymore, so we'll turn that off. And then the store can create a price for however much you're charging the client if you're having them pay before delivery. So you would just go in and select your price, and then you could just hit publish and send it off to your client. You can send them a link or send them an email directly from PixieSet from in here. And then they can pay, and once they pay, they'll be able to download the images, and then they're done. All right, guys, I hope you found this video on headshots helpful. If you've never done these before, I hope the information in this video gave you the confidence to go out and try this now yourself. If you did find this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps my channel out. If you're interested in helping the channel out in other ways, please see the link down in the description below. Again, all this gear I mentioned in this video will also be linked down there as well. So thank you again for watching, and I'll see you guys again on the next one.